Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Collaborating for Impact conversation hosted by fraymedia Foundation. My name is Paula Frey, and I'm absolutely delighted actually to guide today's conversation about something that has never been more necessary, how we work together for greater impact. Across Africa, media entities and civil society organizations are navigating incredibly complex landscapes, shrinking revenue streams, declining trust, information overload. All of these challenges mean we can no longer afford to work in silos. And in fact, collaboration is no longer a luxury, it has become a necessity. But I know, and I think most of us here know, that collaboration is easier said than done. Too often, partnerships remain surface level, maybe a shared logo here, a co-branded event there, and then we move on. And what we want to do today really is to explore how we build strategic, intentional, ethical, trust-based collaborations that move the needle in a way that supports journalism. So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to unpack what meaningful collaboration really looks like. We're going to ask what are the elements of good collaboration that actually works. We're going to talk about how do we find the right partners, those that share your values and purpose. What are the pitfalls that we should all avoid? And most importantly, why does collaboration matter for sustainability and media impact? We're going to start off with collaboration from our four speakers, followed by a moderated discussion and a chance for your questions. So please put those questions in the chat. Also introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who's here. What are the kinds of things that really interest you around collaboration? And we also would like to hear your own thoughts. We want this to be an interactive space. So let me start off by introducing the panel. I'm really, really thrilled about this panel. I've worked with all of them over the years, and I can't think of a better panel actually to talk about collaboration. They all do it, and they do it exceptionally well. We've got Ashley Green-Thompson, who is the founding director of ACT Ubumbano. And Ashley has worked across the heart of social justice collaboration, connecting activists and communities across the Southern African region. Tundi Smith will be joining us a bit late, but she is joining us. She's head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa, and she's going to bring to us a real media perspective in terms of working with donors, working with journalists, and working with civil society for the good of journalism. Beauregard Trump is a man in the spotlight at the moment, preparing for the African Investigative Journalism Conference, it's Africa's biggest journalism conference, brings together hundreds of journalists every year. But Beauregard himself has a long legacy of work as an investigative journalist and an editor with extensive experience on what cross-border collaboration amongst journalists can achieve. And then we've got Miriam Iliem, who is a journalist at Premium Times Nigeria, who has done extensive investigative work, but also has collaborated with experts and researchers to make complex investigations accessible to the public. So thank you, Miriam, Ashley, Beauregard, and Tundi for really joining us today. And also welcome to everyone who's joining us from across the continent. So let's start then with the foundations. And Ashley, we start with you. ACT Ubumbano has brought together diverse partners, community-based organizations, activists, funders, often with different priorities, but all really about telling their own stories. So what have you learned about what makes collaboration truly meaningful rather than transactional? Ashley, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks. You're very kind in your praise of our abilities, but I'll take praise wherever I can get it. Thanks, Paula. You know, there's so much to say about collaboration. The one thing is I've learned over the 6 or 7 years of ACT Ubumbano's existence, you make a decision, you make a deeply political decision. There's that old saying that says injustice and inequality and poverty and all these, all the problems that our world faces They're wicked problems and they require multiple interventions at different time at the same time. Um, and one of the strategies, obviously, is to collaborate, to put resources together in order to maximize the ability to of activists or social actors to impact the particular issue. Uh, so there's a commitment to collaboration, not for its own sake, but in order to achieve a particular objective. And I think in order for that to happen properly, you've got to make a deeply political decision to put aside your own particular narrow objectives. And in civil society, NGOs spend a lot of time trying to ensure their long-term sustainability and survival. And you mentioned in earlier when we were chatting that what makes collaboration useful is the collaboration that goes beyond just the occasional banner and the shared, we sponsor, we're collaborating to bring you this event. Um, I think it means you've actually got to make that a secondary condition and look at actually what is the objective that you're trying to achieve. In my experience, the 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 basis for collaboration has meant listening far more carefully to the voice, particularly of those who are affected by the issues that you're trying to deal with, and not coming there with preconceived notions, preconceived ideas, and priorities. I think if you start there, if you start by listening to what the lived reality is of people, it makes it easier to find the connection points that allow you to collaborate. If you're starting from the fact that it's in your log frame and in your funding proposal, then you're screwed. You're dead in the water because you are trying to engineer a collaboration that actually isn't rooted in a deep understanding of what the issue is as defined by those who are affected by it. So, I mean, there's a whole lot more which I will talk about, I'm sure, as we go, but let me not hog the space and allow you to manage the session.
Before we go on, I want to ask you, I mean, so you put aside maybe your own personal focus, but then how do you build trust across sectors that don't necessarily always speak the same language, literally and figuratively?
So we convene regular conversations with community organizers, activists, NGOs, funders, sometimes the occasional private sector person thrown in, and now and then a media person, but not too many. Um, and in those spaces, what you do is that you create an open space for people to bring their stories and their experiences and their own analysis of what the problems are. In doing that, what you're doing is you are almost forcing people to invest of themselves in the conversation. When you invest of yourself, when you're talking about your own work and your own experience, you necessarily have to have a measure of vulnerability because you're sharing not just your great successes and how wonderful you are, but you're sharing the areas in which perhaps you failed or your practice has actually not led to the change that you were looking for. In doing that, what we found is that it allows for a connection across countries because we operate regionally. It allows for a connection between different types of organizations, community-based advice center kind of organizations, together with campaigning national big NGOs. And even some of the funders find that they are able to connect with organizations they otherwise would not have had access to. But it has to be based on, firstly, honesty. And in my notes in preparing for the session, I spoke about a values framework. There's got to be a shared values framework. You know, there's collaborative efforts around xenophobic agendas, right? So we're definitely not going to be looking to collaborate in spaces like that. So you've got to have a basic values framing that allows for people to connect and to pursue the same kinds of agendas.
Um, I want to move over then to Bureau Guard. So Bureau Guard, what is you're listening to actually, you know, is it the same for journalism collaboration? What does collaboration look like in a journalism space?
I think for the largest part, I can just say yes, and you can move on from me. I think Ashley has summed it up very well. But there's some specifics I think is useful for me, at least within the space that I occupy, to speak about specific things. tangible things in terms of the collaborations. So I'd like to first say that in the investigative journalism world, collaborations most often happen around projects. Usually it involves a leak, and that then necessitates a resource that you require in a certain country or region. So, give you something tangible, Dubai leaks. So we've got this big repository of data which tells us, there's all these apartments, homes, which are being owned by all of these people in Dubai. And among them, of course, as we would find if we looked at property registers in Santon, some of those people are dubious characters, and some of them are outright criminals in their home countries. Dubai is one of those, like London, it's one of those places where people go and hide money and criminals go and hide. So then you require local resources. And maybe this is the start, this is a problem because you can't just have what I will refer to as good time friends. You only need these people. I only need Musa, who's based in Kano, for Mariam's sake there. Yeah, because now I know that there's somebody in Kano who I need to investigate. But for the rest of the year, Musa is off my radar completely. You can't have that. There has to be sustainable relationships. And even in that kind of dynamic that I'm explaining over here, there is an inequity because the one is seen as the provider. I come to you when I need things and when I need information and I need your local knowledge of this particular senator and his wives and his properties, etc. But the rest of the time, we're not really talking. And 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 the problem we have is people do not really recognize that inequity, and it's a historical inequity, which is of course based in. I mean, we've seen this kind of exploitation before, especially when it comes to our region and the like, and our relationship with the North. Um, and so we need to address that. We need to address that head on. And when I speak to my colleagues, across Africa, it's something we all experience. Um, and so when you have collaborations, when you have a project, for instance, one of the things, a starting point would be, I would argue, would be transparency. What are we trying to achieve? Is this something that is funded by some organization? How much money are you getting for this? And what are you what are you actually helping me with? What are you am I just the cheap labor here, or is there a real equitable relationship? And that's the other thing, equity. Because a good collaboration ideally should stretch well beyond a single story or project. You want to see, all of us want to see our media grow, not have to worry about whether we're going to have money to pay our three staffers or just to put food on the table tomorrow. That's the other thing. And coming back to the investment, and that requires the investment. Um, and again, how do we invest in each other? One might be sitting with funding, but the other one will likely have the intellectual capacity and resources, which we must not undervalue, and especially for ourselves, we should not undervalue. And I think that is very important. And all of this is based on a bedrock of equality. Um, and equality across the board, equality that when we say we're going to have a partnership, too often I've seen that these partnerships are inequitable partnerships. We need to have real partnerships where we come in as equals, where there's full transparency, and then we say, right, now we can work together.
You've raised so many things, Bureaucrat. I mean, what I think we've all have experience of we just we all have experience of working in a on a project, for example, where you discover that different people are being paid different amounts, and there's always this kind of sense of, well, you're in Africa, and so you don't need as much, or you don't kind of make as much, etc. I'm really interested in, perhaps actually you could also speak to this. If we want to build partnerships of equality, should we then be building these partnerships long before we actually need them? Should we be identifying the kinds of people we want to work for? And I know that this is difficult if you're, in fact, a Dubai leaks might not require everyone. It might require just Musa in Kanu. And so how do you then create an environment conducive to transparent, equitable partnerships ahead of time? Beauregard, and then maybe Ashley just to add on to it.
Well, I think that you have to include people from the outset. Um, the fact that I mean, I've had colleagues who are sitting in the Pacific Islands working on projects which don't touch many of their people in their area, but they still bring the intellectual expertise which still has weight, it still has value. And then also, I mean, for us in investigative journalism world, we are trying to wag the dog. We are trying to be the tail that wags the dog. So when we launch a project, and if we're gonna have people, for instance, we have to value our audience, for instance. So whereas yes, nobody in the Cook Islands is in Dubai. Unlikely, I'm sure they're there also. But Cook Islands, they not there, but you guys are gonna help, and we're gonna help push us on radio, on television, on socials, because we want to make it a conversation piece. We want people to take note of this. We want the politicians to take note of this. We want to see impact. And so I'm just giving one example of a way for them to be useful in this regard. And the same for, if there's nobody in Kano, then yeah, same thing. We want it on the radio stations so that we can shift the media attention to that. So that would be one way I would imagine. And again, like that is only for the project. But beyond that, if you're going to have real equitable relationships, how do we ensure that we have the same level of or a similar level of expertise coming to bear on a situation. So the next time we have a project, people are properly skilled, for instance, and so that means a longer investment. It's yeah, a longer investment in people, in organizations who ultimately consists of people, and you have to invest in those people to make sure that they strong and the media is strong, and that they are more than capable and have the expertise to weigh in on various situations throughout.
Yeah, I think bureaucrat captures it. Over the years, we've had relationships that have ebbed and flowed. So where there's what is the word I'm looking for? When you connect, when there's traction, um, because you have a shared commitment to a particular program, issue, campaign, agenda, that relationship, I think, will necessarily grow because you have quite clearly identified common interests. But there's times when you drift apart, right? And because I think we shouldn't elevate collaboration to the point that if we're not collaborating, we did. I think it's an important strategy, but we don't want to be building relationships for their own sake because we think that at some point they will, I don't know, they'll be useful for us. So it's okay to let relationships wax and wane. I think the other thing that's important in maintaining or maintaining the environment for relationships to prosper, I think, is to keep communications. And I must say it's interesting that I'm speaking on a media platform because um, I try and avoid the media most of the time. It's best to keep one's head under the parapet. But uh, I found a monthly newsletter, for example. It's my favorite product in the whole world. And I think I probably learned that from Paula way back in the day. But have regular communication, keep people up to date, make sure that everybody knows what you're doing, even if there's not a weekly call or a monthly call. But the way you also put yourself out there to say, we're active, we're visible, we're alive, so that, the partners that might be in far-flung places will know that you're around. We convene a solidarity hub. We did one 2 weeks ago where we had 100 community organizers and activists from about 8 Southern African countries, which is our area of operation. But every year, there's interest expressed from as far afield as Nigeria and Liberia. And this year we had somebody coming from Kenya and from Uganda because you're communicating that you're around and people find that there's something that they might want to pursue with you. And so they look for you and you're able to develop those relationships as you go.
Thank you very much. Um, Before I move on to Miriam and talk about individual kind of journalistic collaboration, Tandi, I apologize for putting you on the spot. We've been talking about, what are the conditions for collaboration? What is the value of collaboration amongst organizations? Now, and you're going to tell us about your new name. But Media Monitoring Africa is known for its collaborative kind of stance when it comes to engaging around issues that impact on the media. So perhaps you could just tell us the ethos, what is behind this collaborative strategy and how you choose who you collaborate with.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Paula. And I'm so sorry that I was running a bit late for the session. I had a prior engagement that also started late, and so it's just one of those mornings. So big apologies, but I'm really happy to be here. Yes, and we have big announcement. Media Monitoring Africa has just rebranded, launched our new brand called Moxie Africa. We are in a transition phase, so you'll be hearing both names over the next few months. But Media Monitoring Africa is transitioning into Moxie Africa. Moxie Africa, striving for open and trusted information. And so if we have time, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of the collaborative nature and, partnerships of a lot of our initiatives and the work that we do, it comes from a place where, I think we learned the value of collaboration and consensus, especially in very much around our media policy and regulation work, our public policy processes. I'll touch on some more practical partnerships and collaborations as well, but we found that especially in our environment, in the media environment, when we look at policy and regulation, it is so fractured and siloed in terms of the processes, the positions, the political agendas, that it really was incredibly valuable to get a variety of stakeholders in one room, unpack the issues, look at the different positions, air out frustrations and tensions that different positions have, and come to a common ground and consensus on some of the key problems or challenges with particular policies or regulations. And what that did, and the reason that I'm wanting to highlight that, was it built a common interest, a consensus, and it made everyone who often it feels like you're working in isolation, where you feel like maybe your position or your policy position is yours and yours alone. It reminded us that there are common areas, that there are common interests, and essentially everyone wants very similar outcomes in terms of policy and regulation processes when it comes to media and the industry. And, a stronger voice always has more impact. And strengthening that voice comes from having a number of organizations supporting similar positions. So I think that's the first step the first area that I wanted to mention is really about that multiple different voices agreeing on a similar approach completely amplifies and strengthens that position. And we've seen how that has had impact in the policy space. I think the other thing that I wanted to touch on is, Paula, you mentioned, how do we approach partnerships or collaboration? And, it's there isn't one strategy that fits everything. I think that what we're seeing is a decline in resources, a decline in capacity, and we at a point where we are, many organizations, and when I say we, I'm talking very much from a civil society perspective, we are expected to have a lot more impact or be able to show a lot more impact with less resources, less capacity, and still address the issues that we're trying to solve, essentially. And so I think that there are two areas that have proven that collaboration and partnerships are useful, in that when you are trying to address a particular issue or implement a particular intervention, if you can find other organizations or individuals or campaigns that essentially want the same outcome that you are working towards, you're looking to you're working on similar objectives, you are trying to solve the same problem, that already is, I think, a good foundation for a potential collaboration and partnership. Organizations often have different audiences, different relationships, and different stakeholders. So to leverage those advantages in a collaboration or partnership strengthens your reach, strengthens the impact, and just sort of, yeah, has that broader impact. And I think I'll stop there for now, but yeah, I think I've addressed the points.
Thanks, Tandy. And the issue of intention and trust seems to be so critical, right? This kind of common intention, but then the relationship is really built on trust. But then there also seems to be a real call for clarity in terms of what is the clarity of purpose, clarity of roles, clarity of communication in terms of how you're going to engage. We've spoken a lot about organization, but I want to move now to Miriam to really talk about, because a lot of the act of journalism actually is a collaborative effort. It's a collaboration between you, the photographer, the news desk, but it's also a collaboration between you and to a degree, your sources of information. So, Miriam, you work with researchers and data experts. I mean, you're working at the moment with a health expert on an incredible project in Nigeria. What makes collaboration between journalists and experts successful? And I want you also to talk about how you manage the relationship, as a journalist, as an ethical journalist. What are the things that you actually do to ensure that the journalism comes first? Miriam.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to be part of this conversation. And then even looking at the previous panelists that we've had, they've highlighted so many points that are also related to, the work we do as journalists. I think collaboration in journalism is such an important topic. And then looking at, collaborating for impact, it means that you do it deliberately, you do it strategically in a way that you want to achieve a desired goal. So, and then when we look at it, honestly, I don't think, or is there really a great work of journalism out there that does not involve any form of collaboration? I really don't think. Most of the pieces that we've done, especially even at Premium Times, they always emphasize the need for you to get an expert to provide insight into what you do. So as journalists, whether it's working with experts, civil society organization, I think one point that has been made, I think Mr. Brugard mentioned it earlier, I think transparency is very important, identifying that you need to be very transparent from the onset. So whether directly or indirectly, for your work to come out really great, you have to be strategic enough to identify that, okay, this is the person I want to talk to. Yeah. So as journalists, our work can come with so much pressure, where we're expected to simplify complex issues. I work as a health journalist full time. So you know how health journalism can be. It is really sensitive. We're expected to simplify complex issues. So over time, I have learned that we can't really do this in isolation. You definitely need to work with an expert, someone who has been in that field for years, who have studied that area. So we need to, work with people who have really researched on such issues for you to be able to, communicate effectively. In public health, communication is very important. And the goal is to make the public understand what information you are passing across to them. And then also, when it comes to my experience, I have learned that the approach we use as journalists is very important. How you approach experts is very important because these people are also humans and they are very busy. Our work can come with so much urgency. You need to get something out there quickly. So when you reach out to experts, the way you approach them really matters a lot. We don't just expect them to say, okay, I'll respond to you immediately, because as journalists, we expect everybody to know that we are doing our work for public good. We don't expect any reward from that. So the way we approach experts is very, very important. So when experts I feel another thing we can also do is to make experts understand that they are not just sources. We need to let them see that they are also experts and partners in whatever topic we are covering. I currently work with a public health physician in Lagos on a topic on public health and how it relates to climate change, especially with focus on women's health. And fortunately, this is a project that involved going to the field with a health expert. And it was like another thing entirely, because most times when you reach out to experts, I want to speak with you on this topic, they invite you around, they tell you, okay, call me so time. But this time I got to, work with these experts on the field. I saw how it also improved community trust. The people saw that, okay, this is not just a journalist coming to get our voices and going back. This is also about achieving a goal. They saw the expert as somebody who they could trust more, so that way it gave my work a whole new look. And I feel that even public institutions, especially when it comes to public health, when we realize that research that they do, the work that they do, they don't just do it and post it on their website. They need to see how to work closely with journalists, even go to the field with journalists in a way, because as journalists, we're experts when it comes to storytelling, but their own work as, researchers will help, give that work a whole new look. So beyond the fact that our work we're expected to be accurate, transparency is very important. So collaborating also builds trust. It gives audiences, when you do a story and an audience saw that, okay, there's a particular part where you have provided an insight from an expert, they tend to trust your work even more. So I feel collaboration is really important. And thank you for this topic and this conversation.
Thanks. And very good. I wonder if you want to add to that. I mean, the idea of having a deeper relationship with your source, in the sense that you're actually working with them in order to uncover something, to explain something. How does that play out, for example, in investigative journalism?
Okay.
I think that what Mariam is saying sounds fantastic, and I can absolutely understand that perspective and that kind of relationship and how it can massively add to the value, because these people, they embody a lot more trust than you will build up in your short space of time in that community or on that story. But then, of course, it also throws up the challenge, where we have to maintain this distance for our own perspective and our own, we strive towards a level of objectivity. So there's also that, but I do absolutely agree with, and with the idea of actually having experts as, and not only experts, I mean, experts in various guises, of course, be they community leaders or something else, to recognize that and to try and have that closer engagement. I mean, I've just been going through a lot of entries for our investigative journalism awards. And one of the things, what I love is you've got the big investigations, like we're taking on the president of this country or something. And then you got people doing real community-based work where a lot of they spend months in communities. And that intimate kind of work is the kind of stuff I still value so highly. And I think it's fantastic. I think about my own work when I've worked in the field and being able to see that impact firsthand and keeping key members updated of developments in your story so that you don't lose that connection, so that it's not such an wholly exploitative relationship, which too often journalism is. It's a very exploitative thing. You're going to go there and you're going to go and take get your quotes, and you in and you out, and boom, done. Wash your hands, you're out of there. And it leaves a bad taste in the mouth, of course, when you sometimes compelled to do work like that. um, so it is so much more enriching for yourself, and of course for the stories that you're trying to tell, and for the ambitions I think that we all have for journalism to effectively create change, for us to have that approach.
Sorry,
Ca-
maybe. Sorry, I just wanted to
Sorry,
follow up.
I really
Yeah.
feel like I want to jump in on that one because the question of experts is something that bedevils us. Our spaces are, we start from the premise that says if you're surviving in today's world, you're an expert at surviving the dehumanization that the world is doing to you, right? The fact that you're still standing and you're organizing, you don't need Beauregard or Paula or Tandy or Mariam to come and tell you how to survive in a hostile environment because you're doing it. Um, and so I liked what Beauregard is saying about root as a journalist, paying attention to the wisdom that comes from people who actually survive and resist and learn how to defend their humanity. Um, and so yeah, I'm still grappling with the notion of how do you tap into this concept of experts, people with experience. Let's not call them experts, perhaps, because I don't like the word experts myself. But how do you tap into the wisdom that comes from having been on the earth a longer time, or having read quite a lot more books, or become kind of focused in your study of a particular field? But how do you harness that? And I think Mariam was talking about it, that how you connect that knowledge body with the lived reality of communities becomes important because then you're able to build a relationship of trust. Um, and so my last point on that was that for me then challenges particularly journalistic types and people who are doing investigative journalism, who are helping to shape the narrative, is how to develop an analysis and a critique that goes beyond the voice of the experts, of the usual suspects, and actually starts foregrounding the voice and the wisdom of communities who are resisting their dehumanization. I think that for me, as a big fan of investigative journalists and the media community in general, because it's one of the last bulwarks against authoritarianism, I think that there's a lot more that can be done to push a narrative that actually is rooted in lived experience of people rather than the usual political commentators that parade on our screens. So I'm putting it out there. I mean, I'm not a journalist, so maybe I'm talking nonsense. I don't know.
I'm going to let Beauregard respond to that, and then I'll come back to you, Miriam. Then Beauregard?
I'm going to respond and throw it to Mariam,
Okay.
because this is no, Mariam, hold on. This is to your expertise. I think this will ring true to you. So actually, to what I want to do is, we have different types of journalism. Some of it, unfortunately, a lot of it these days is desktop journalism, armchair journalism, we call it. People sitting behind a laptop. We sometimes use a phone. We have quick calls. We get a comment here, comment there, and we put it out. That is the churn. That is putting out content. I don't rate that kind of journalism. Some of it is useful. I'm talking about that quick stuff, we're just trying to put out content. Um, and so you can get a quick comment. You get a list of, like, if you need an expert on gender studies, you can call this person. If you need an expert on corruption, there's the person. And they give their quotes, and we plug it in and it goes. And then you do the work where you actually go down into a community. There's a water crisis in Diepsloot. So I'm going to go to Diepsloot and I'm going to go speak to those people about their lived experiences. I cannot imagine, even though I have experience of some of that, I cannot imagine exactly what they go through. So when I go and speak to the people who lived through that, and I convey their story, it is 100 or more times more impactful than me just sitting at my desk and doing this. Now, that's why I was saying, Mariam, this is the kind of thing that I'm sure rings true to you. Now, I'm saying impactful because the audience that we're speaking to, they are not ignorant people, man. They have an innate sense of what is a powerful story and what is not, because we all understand storytelling because it's in our bones, it's something which we grow up with. So that has so much more resonance than me sitting at home doing my thing. And so, Paula, I mean, it's you the moderator, of course, but with your permission, I think Mariam can elaborate on that maybe.
Miriam, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I absolutely agree with what you just said. I think everything still boils down to understanding that journalism, it's all about ethics. It's when as a journalist you uphold ethics so much, there are some things that you do, and even before submitting to your editor, you ask yourself, is this really okay to go, good to go? And talking about doing the rigor, I think I work with a platform, Premium Times, Premium Times. I work with a platform that even just a page of a news, let's say a news release or a press release, Premium Times, you are expected as a journalist at Premium Times to ask questions, to critically look at it, that, okay, is this really okay? What insights do I need? Who do I need to call? If you don't understand anything, you get asked questions. There are so many times that reporters get their stories back. This is not okay. This is not good to go. Although, of course, there are platforms that you see that they just copy and paste, they do the desktop work. But I work with a platform where ethics is very, very important. You're expected to be on the field, you're expected to ask questions, you're expected to go to communities. And then when we talk about experts, we're not only talking about those who are in the offices alone or those who are researchers alone. Even community sources, sometimes they are experts on their own because they have insights into what a particular community is going through. So identifying that whoever you're working with, I think non-partisanship, the track record of non-partisanship is very important to the work that we do as journalists. So the expert analysis must always, stand on its own, regardless of, whatever influence or political actor involved.
So I want to dig a little bit, though, Miriam, in the work that you've been doing with a health professional. So Miriam's been doing a series of investigations into the impact of climate change, and she's been working very closely with a health professional in doing that story. And I suppose for journalists who are potentially looking at collaborating in this way, of doing a story that really requires kind of in-depth knowledge of broader issues and then finding out from communities how exactly that this has been impacting them. When you're working this closely with somebody who's not a journalist, how do you retain ownership of the story? How do you make sure that at the end of the day, the story that you're producing has been enhanced and informed by the knowledge of your collaborator, but still kind of adheres to the journalistic kind of ethics that you talk about?
Yeah, so interesting. The current project I'm currently working on, in fact, I'm working with a health expert who is a government staff. And of course, this is a project that there's going to be a feature story, a documentary that's going to be published. So at the point when we, started, we had a lot of back and forth. The individual was like, no, I can't do this because of my work. I can't do this because of the government. So I think the most important thing is to, have a clear understanding. The memorandum of understanding, it might not be formal, it can be informal. Understanding and letting the person know that the final editorial control belongs to me. As a journalist, I know what is expected. I know what's the standard of my newsroom. So regardless, I would, I will be able to understanding where the expert is coming from is also very important. Knowing that, okay, whatever a narrative is going out there is not one that would, that would have a negative impact on the work that the expert is doing. So at the end of the day, it's about having this vetting trap, not allowing, whether the CSO you're working for or the researcher you are working with, whether it's on any project whatsoever, not allowing that control the narrative is very important. Having that independent mindset as a journalist is very important. So I think another thing which would probably be a major issue will be in the area of jargon. I think I would like to mention that we mostly have this trap where when experts provides analysis, sometimes we just copy and then quote them. Sometimes you can also read and look at it that, okay, what is this word? What is this technical word that needs to be explained in a way such that the audience understands? So a lot of challenges are involved when it comes to collaborating with an expert, but at the end of the day, it's all boils down to the trust, the mutual respect, the transparency, and then letting them understand that, okay, this is what we are working on. This is my own job as a journalist. You can't control the editorial narrative. The independence belongs to me when it comes to the storytelling. So I think that has really been helpful so far, working with experts. Currently at Premium Times, we have a series called the PT Health Watch, and we've started since January. And what that story involves that identifying a major health topic, for instance, and then reaching out to experts. After you have done your research, you gather data, then you reach out to experts to ask them to provide, insights into that topic. And we notice that people have really been engaging with it. So that way it has, built a relationship. When you get to experts, and it's not just about you are building a relationship with them in a way, you are providing information about a particular health topic, and you are providing explainers, and they are involved. They see it as a win-win situation, like it's a win-win situation for them. They have a profile online. They see them as experts. So that way, we know that we have built a relationship in case of an investigation, because sometimes we have even gotten story ideas from experts. They reach out. So when this trust has been built, experts are even the one that give us information that, okay, there's a particular community, they really need help, you need to go there. And that way, it has been a win-win situation so far for me as a health journalist.
I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to have civil society on this discussion is because increasingly we're seeing that in order to get out of the newsroom, in order to get away from our desks, to go out into the field, to be able to do work out of big cities, etc., journalists have had to collaborate with civil society organizations who are doing that work. And so I think there's a potential for partnership and more collaboration. And be interesting to know that if you're going to collaborate with, for example, a civil society organization to get a story that you would otherwise not be able to do, what are the rules of engagement? What do we need to be thinking about in order to make sure that the ownership of stories actually kind of stay with us? Ida Jooste, who's a science journalist in South Africa, in the registration form, asked the question of how do we embrace competitiveness within collaboration? So, Beauregard, that's a question for you, right? When a lot of different journalists are working on the Panama Papers, the Dubai papers, the Gupta papers, etc. How do you remain competitive while you collaborate with other journalists in this particular case?
Thanks for that very much, Ida. So I think there's a number of ways. On the project itself, I think there's opportunities for you to still be competitive because of the way you present the story and what your focus will be. I've seen oftentimes people will be writing about the same things in different publications. So you'll see that maybe Premium Times will write a story in one way, and then that same story will appear in The Guardian in the UK, and it will be done in a completely different way. because the trusted brand in Nigeria is going to be Premium Times. The trusted brand for the UK and for parts of the US is going to be The Guardian. So there's that level of competitiveness. And then, of course, the other thing which has always been the big thing for media organizations is offering unique stories. So it's not just within that, because look, when you do those collaborations, we've charted it. You get a spike which lasts for 2 days, and on the third day it starts to taper dramatically. And then as you drop, what we typically do is, and this is not trade secrets, what we typically do is we'll then go and do other reveals along the way. So the first story would be Uhuru Kenyatta and his family. They have properties worth $2 million in Dubai. That'll be the first big thing. Then we go down the way and everybody goes and reacts. And then 3 days later, we say Raila Odinga also has an apartment there, and may his soul rest in peace. And his apartment is worth $250,000. So there's a revival of the story again. You see, so we know that, but ultimately the time frame is short. What you gonna do for the other 50 odd weeks of the year? So you have to have regular content, which gives you that competitive edge, and which allows you to do the stories better. And also it comes down to, I mean, what processes do you have in place that sets you apart? Because some people, I mean, I could read a story on one platform, which is, I mean, they include everything that's been whispered in their ears, whereas another platform is regarded as more reputable because they're more rigorous as to what they actually put in print. So all of those things contribute to making your product and your media organization competitive still.
I want to shift a little bit and talk about the pitfalls and the challenges of collaboration. I mean, collaboration isn't easy. We all have stories of what went wrong or what could go wrong. And actually, I mean, you say that you try to avoid media, but I'm just really interested, why? What are the common pitfalls you've seen in collaborations between civil society and media? Um, and if you have any thoughts on what we should be avoiding.
I'm going to get into trouble. Um,
Good.
I was at the national convention, the first meeting that happened at UNISA a couple of months ago. And it was interesting to see civil society play in that space where power is present. And I think for me, one of the biggest pitfalls is um, our eyes are perennially focused on power. Even when we're praying, our eyes go up, because our God is meant to be up and lording it over us all. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is we believe that influence and the ability to effect change comes from proximity to power. And I think that for me is the biggest killer of any meaningful collaboration, because particularly in civil society, it's an abiding problem where constructive collaboration is impacted by individual agendas. So that for me, I think is a big thing. How you avoid that? I think it takes a political decision and a personal decision to cast your role differently and to not see yourself as the savior of the universe. And I think that's true for everybody except investigative journalists, who are our savior at the moment. But I think that it takes an open political conversation that says, are we complicit in maintaining systems that actually continue to marginalize important communities and voices? Or are we, and are, in critiquing ourselves, are we honest enough to change our behavior in such a way that it opens us up to the uncertainty of new relationships, rather than going back to the old relationship that's abusive, that we know, but we keep going back to it because it's familiar and it doesn't challenge us? to be different and to change. Sorry, I'm slightly philosophical there, but I mean,
Yeah, but I say, actually bringing like kind of philosophical bent here to the journalists who just want the checklist, please. Then, but really important food for thought, and something that might link Tandi, I think that to what I want to ask you about. What about in donor-funded collaborations, right? Where there might be power imbalances or shifting priorities. I mean, how do you manage that while staying true to purpose? How do you collaborate in a donor space while staying true to purpose?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, uh, to be completely, frank, it is difficult because not only do you have to deal with your sort of internal understanding and dynamics of when you collaborate with donors or funders or something like, those entities, but you have to manage the external perceptions of whether there's been influence from the donor over your work and whether what you are displaying in the public eye is true to what the organization stands for and hasn't had that influence. I mean, it's something that, we've been targeted for many times as civil society being, having received funding from the likes of Open Society Foundation and Millennium Trust. And, the way that we've managed that is to be as consistent and as transparent and as accountable as possible. Because when you sort of lay all your cards on the table, when you are able to prove that you have remained consistent for however many years, where your approaches and methodologies and your objectives are the same, and you simply have, that support to implement that. And again, it goes back to transparency and accountability as well as expectations. You have to be absolutely clear when you move into a partnership, um, or any kind of relationship with a donor, with someone supporting your work. You have to make sure you understand expectations. Expectations from your side, expectations from the donor side, how much influence, if or not influence, but how much involvement does the partner want in the particular work, and you need to then decide whether that is something that you're willing to compromise and negotiate on, and whether that will impact at the end of the day what you are trying to achieve. um, I mean, there have been instances where we have once or twice, declined a partnership because there was an over-involvement or too much involvement from a particular party. It hasn't happened often, but we've had to sort of stand back and go, do we really feel comfortable with this kind of influence that this partner wants to have? So again, it goes back to transparency, accountability, and for not trying to sound too cheesy, to stay true to yourself, and what you are trying to achieve.
Absolutely. There's a real danger, and it's particularly amplified for journalism, of chasing the money, of doing journalism because there's funding in that space, rather than doing journalism because it's necessary and needed. So good advice there. Beauregard, what have you learned about conflict management when it comes to collaborative projects?
Ooh, now we're touching on something, yeah. One of the biggest, as Tandy's talking, there's something I should mention here. One of the biggest challenges we have within investigative journalism and collaboration is that our profession is male dominated. And that then brings some of the worst traits of men into that space. One of which can be arrogance and that whole big man mentality, you know. um, Too many type A personalities. So when you've got those type A personalities, everybody's right and everybody's a leader. And that's not always useful. It doesn't always allow. In fact, no, sometimes it outright does not allow for compromise. and people, people don't want to back down. It's like watching silverback gorillas in Rwanda or DRC, you know, going about their business. And that's not always, that whole thing about, and hey, actually, you set off something now. That whole thing about when elephants fight. Yeah. So then the rest of us who are mere peasants, we trying to do the work, and you have this happening up here. So yeah, the egos get in the way sometimes, and people take postures. There's posturing, and they take positions. It's like you're back at school, man. It's actually quite hilarious to watch some of this happening. And I'm sure you see this in civil society space also, where people have this idea like, oh, but we don't like this one because they like this about us. What is this we, this royal we? So that's I find that to be the biggest challenge, these misconceptions and these egos that people have, self-aggrandizement and the like, which ultimately means that the work suffers. That is the big elephant in the room for us, when we start off with anything. And even when it comes to, like, who you're going to partner with. And that is also the thing, again, this is not a journalist specific thing. This is across industries, it's about, who do we like? Who do we like to work with? Who are we friendly with? Those things play out in journalism proper, like, oh, I saw so and so at this place, and yeah, we get along well, and that is it. And this is, again, that's why these relationships are critical for the kind of work we do. These are not just incidental. Some of them are cultivated, of course, because people are being strategic, and that's a good thing.
What do you do to calm down the silverbacks?
We try to actually speak to the bigger picture. You try to make sure that everybody, and also and it's something that you mentioned before we started this. You set out the rules of engagement quite early so that people know what to expect. And you also have to allow people a degree of autonomy. You can't go and dictate to somebody. I'm not going to go and tell Mujid, yeah, Mujid, you must print it like this, and we want this headline and this picture. No, he's not going to accept that. This is the Premium Times. They got their own audience. You have to be specific about these things, and you have to allow people to do things the way that they do them. You cannot go and be dictatorial in your engagements. And I think when we have clear rules of engagement, everything becomes a lot easier. And this happens also, sometimes you have to change course midway through because something happened or there's a realization. Then there has to be a an agreed position of how we proceed. It can't just be one person or one organization dictating. If you try to do that, then it's not a real partnership. So I think those are two of the most important things: is consultation, and then of course setting out rules of engagement quite early.
Miriam, in terms of working with with um, with various people in order to make your story a reality. I mean, how do you manage competing um, needs, desired outcomes? How do you make sure that even though I mean, as a journalist, you have a specific outcome that you want to achieve, and it might not be the outcome that the person you're working with wants to achieve. How do you manage that relationship in order to get the best story you can?
I think I would leverage on the point Boriga just made. It's about, you know, having a clear understanding and agreed objective that, okay, this is what we are working on. So in a situation where you are working with someone and the person is trying to control the narrative or is trying to take, full ownership of the work, and in that way, it's no longer a partnership. So at the end of the day, it's all begins from the onset. Once you have identified that you're working on something and you have identified who you're working with and there's an agreement already. So it starts from the beginning, being transparent enough, letting that person know whether there's going to be a memorandum of understanding in an informal way, because we're talking about partnership here. So it has to be strategic. Yeah, so we all have a goal. We have something we hope to achieve. So from the onset, there should be like a clear goal of what you're trying to do together.
Thank you. We want to move now to get some questions in the chat, but also we've got a couple of questions still from the registration form. Ntomdaza Oshai from Bombelo News is asking, how can one form a collaboration with a big company that you know for a fact doesn't need your services but you need them? How, when there's that a difference in kind of need, how do you bring them on board? Anyone want to respond to Ntomdaza on that?
I'm happy to do that. Um, no, you are not a small player, and you don't have, again, you mustn't think of yourself as such. You have a community you represent, a specialization that you represent. I was thinking about the person who put that comment up earlier, Ida Jooste. They specialize in health journalism, and they've taken it to new levels. I mean, relatively a small group of people. They what, 12 people. Um, Mombelo News might be 2 people or 3 people. Um, you have a area of specialization, so maybe you want to do a collaboration. And I'm gonna be stereotypical here. Maybe there's a story about mining. So you know the community. You know who the shift manager is for this, who can tell you about how this happens and the like, because they live around the corner from auntie so and so. That is your specialization. The big newspaper in the city doesn't know that. You bring all of that to bear. I was working with a fantastic young journalist recently on a story also involving mining. And it's the local journalist who set everything up. There was the co-author of that piece now, because they know intimately how the mining has affected the populace and all the players involved. They understand the dynamic. For me to show up in your town, it would take me weeks, months to get to where you are right now. So don't undermine, don't take away your own power. You have big stories there that would be of interest to the bigger media organizations.
Sandy, I wonder if maybe you could also come in here just to talk about, I mean, there's Moxie. I have to remember that it's no longer Media Monitoring Africa. Has a range of collaborations. I mean, you collaborate with donors, you collaborate with media, you collaborate with civil society, and I'm just wondering whether in how you decide whether you in fact have somebody whose role is simply to build partnerships and collaboration, or whether your collaborations are determined by a project or a current need. Tandy, I'm not sure if you
Sure,
can,
sorry.
yeah.
I've just had to change the room that I was busy in. So I hope you can see me.
We can.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. We have a number of different partnerships. I mean, I sort of touched on the policy, public policy participation that we focus on previously. But like you say, we have a number of partnerships. I mean, I think off the top of my head, if I can think of the different stakeholders, we partner with industry, we partner with government, we partner with other civil society. Like you said, we partner with media. And there's no one particular person or area that manages stakeholder relations or partnerships or anything like that. It really is, and this might be surprising, but it really is project by project or initiative by initiative basis, because and it's like that because the nature of each project or the nature of each collaboration is so different, because it depends on the abilities and the resources or capacity of partners. I think what we often do is when we are structuring a project or when we are, planning an initiative, we'll take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, so who in this space is already working on the issue? Who do we think would be valuable in terms of supporting their impact to come in and have a a broader collective, or it could even be a case of who do we need to partner on this to get the results that we want to get. So, for example, we during elections, we work with the IEC, and we've got a partnership with the IEC, and we've got a partnership with or a framework of cooperation with the platforms, because we know that if we want to mitigate disinformation during an election period, we need to leverage our relationships with the platforms in order to get the outcome that we want. And so there's no blanket approach to decision making around who you partner with or who you collaborate with. And I have to be completely realistic and practical here. Sometimes it even comes from a funding arrangement where, an external party or a donor has, seen the space, seen the environment, and we've come with a proposal on a particular project. And the proposal will say, who in the space is doing similar work? What partnerships are you going to develop? So sometimes there's even a push from a funder because of their limited resources. And if they're wanting to have, support the area that they are trying to have impact in, for them it's beneficial to have organizations partner and leverage, and which isn't always something that often gets spoken about, because to think about a push for collaboration from a donor perspective raises questions. But to encourage that collaboration and still get that outcome helps everyone at the end of the day. And so, yeah, going back to the original question, I think that it really is tailored to what you're trying to achieve, who is already doing work in the space, and who to best collaborate with to get the outcome that you're trying to get. We are in the process of launching a new collaboration, a new partnership called PIE. That's PIIE, and that's the Partnership on Information Integrity in Elections. And because from experience, we've seen how many organizations are trying to do good work during the election period, who are trying to mitigate online harms and disinformation and build media credibility during an election period. And, after sort of assessing the outcomes of everyone's work in the previous election, we saw an opportunity and a gap to build a formal partnership and collaboration with the organizations already doing work in the space, in order to leverage off the shrinking pool of funding, as well as having a wider impact in that work.
Sandy, with so much experience in collaboration and partnerships, I mean, you must see things go wrong. I'm just wondering that when collaborations don't work, when partnerships kind of go awry, what have you learned from that, and what do you do to mitigate that?
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. Partnerships have gone wrong. And it's, I think the main area that causes a collaboration or partnership to go sour is lack of clarity around expectation and roles. And so, before, if you look 5-10 years ago, we would speak to a partner, speak to an organization, say, oh, we're wanting to do this. Would you like to come in and do this? Or, do you want to collaborate on this element? And, it's almost a bit of because you in the civil society space, or you're in the same environment, and you often know each other as well. And so going on word of mouth was always, oh, we're working on this together. Oh, we're partnering on this. And then when there's a lack of clarity or expectation, someone says, oh, but I thought our branding was supposed to go there. Oh, but we're a partner. Why didn't you talk about us in this forum? And so, and it's often used to happen unintentionally, but because there was lack of clarity around roles, expectations, and who would provide what resources into a collaboration, things would get miscommunicated or there'd be misunderstandings, which would impact the potential for relationships and collaborations going forward. And so now, if we are initiating any collaboration or partnership or working with anyone, we first and foremost will sit down, discuss roles and responsibilities, discuss expectations, and put that into a document that all parties see and agree to. So like a memorandum of understanding or some kind of document that everyone has access to. And so it seems, it seems sometimes like it's a bit too much, for just a simple collaboration, but it really can mitigate the risks of something going wrong.
Thanks. And actually speaks to also what Miriam was saying earlier on about just, even if it's an informal and understanding, to just really from the outset to begin to think of that. I want to acknowledge the other questions that have come through also on the registration form. Lindy from the South African Film Academy, really kind of saying, well, in collaborative relations, how do we create shared services as different organizations without necessarily infringing on different regulations? And then Kolani from the UWC Media Inclusion and Diversity unit has asked about finding solutions. So what are the solutions that we might actually have to look at? And so as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I want to ask each of our speakers to really think and share, so we walk away with a kind of a practical checklist for collaboration. What is, in a sentence or two, what's the one principle or practice that you've seen that makes collaboration truly impactful? Ashley, you were talking about your gathering, bringing everyone together, the newsletters, etc. But in terms of making, being able to bring people together, maybe in moments of urgency, what's the one principle or practice that helps make collaboration truly impactful? And I'd like to hear from all of the speakers on that. So Ashley, you first.
That's a tough one. I always, it's becoming a bit of a mantra. I believe honesty is the big one, and it speaks to collaboration. If I was wanting to make an input on the conversation about funders as well. Funders need us. We give them credibility. So we've got to stop seeing ourselves as being the begging bowl approach. We actually offer something into this space. And I think we need to have more confident and more honest conversations with the people that we encounter, including with funders, including with big, powerful NGOs and companies that we want to collaborate with. And I think if you start a conversation honestly, then you can't help but put your agenda on the table. And that means that you challenge the other person to put their agenda on the table. And when you do that, I think you have the basis for actually having a real collaboration. And then, of course, it doesn't hurt to have a really watertight MOU that outlines who has to do what and who mustn't do what.
Thanks. Beauregard, what's the one practical solution for you for collaborating amongst journalists?
Hey, why are you making it one now? You said two and now it's one. Okay, I'm gonna
Good,
go
two's good.
over your number. I'm gonna shoot quickly. Okay, so the first thing is it has to be an equitable relationship. I think we've spoken about that at length. Um, there has to be transparency. I think that is self-evident. And then the final thing I just want to add to that is don't get into a collaboration for the sake of it because you see some big organization knocking on your door. If it doesn't offer value to your organization and to your constituency/audience, don't do it because it's wasting your time and your resources and it will probably consume most of your resources. So don't do it if you don't have a real vested interest in it and you can't see value in it.
And that's really good advice, because I mean, sometimes I think smaller organizations, because they want to play with the big players, end up actually funding their work and not being paid or given a value for their contribution. Miriam, what's your advice to journalists working with other journalists, with photographers, with professionals, health professionals, for example, out in the field? How do you maintain a good collaboration?
Yeah, so I think transparency is very important. And then one other thing is to have that clarity from the very beginning, knowing that everyone bring their different, experience and expertise. So the clarity and the respect is very, very important. And then I would also like to add that many times journalists, we also have to be very careful to, putting things out of context. Especially there are so many platforms today that they rely so much on clickbaits and everything. So they are always quick to take things out of context. So we have to be very careful in a way that at the end of the day, the collaboration is not one that would negatively impact the other person. So having that clarity and respect, they are very important to me.
Great, thank you. And Tandy, from you, the one thing that you would advise everyone?
So I think just to support and reiterate what my fellow panelists have said, I will think really critical points to consider with collaborations and partnerships. But I think just to emphasize clarity, communication, and yeah, I also want to emphasize, if you're not going to get value out of a collaboration or partnership, don't collaborate for the sake of collaboration because it looks good on paper. Because that's when it's going to go wrong. And always make sure you have that MOU, you understand roles and responsibilities, and don't be afraid to say no.
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you very much to our panelists, Beauregard, Ashley, Miriam, and Tundi. It's been such an incredibly rich conversation. If there's one takeaway for me, is that collaboration is not an event in the sense that it's really a relationship, that it's a relationship built on trust, even if it's in a trust codified in an MOU. It's built on clarity, and I think it's also built on a shared vision of impact. I mean, we're collaborating because we want to do more with the little we do have. I also have to acknowledge that the series of webinars that we've been doing is in part as a result of our collaboration and partnership with the Association of Independent Publishers, who have identified the needs and the issues that they want to be able to really kind of unpack for not just their members, but for media across the continent. And so we're really grateful to them for identifying not only this theme, but also our compliance theme that we've had previously. If there are any issues around building a sustainable media that you really want us to be looking at, please feel free to reach out. At fraymedia Foundation, we believe our work is stronger when we do it together, when journalists, when civil society, when funders and communities work to build collective solutions to our shared challenges. So thank you once again, everyone who is involved. Thank you to Lesejo and Tubangi, who were doing all of the work behind the scenes and making sure that everything works well together. Please stay connected to us, to our social media challenges, and let us know if there's anything else you want us to focus on. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, guys. Okay. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Hi, thanks, Paula.